company. Macho Man Randy Savage is still with the WWF, but Hulk Hogan is gone by this point. And there's a new program in town called WWF Radio, or Radio WWF, where good old JR is hosting the show. And we've talked about this before. I believe it was on our WrestleMania 9 episode. Maybe it was the Macho Man episode. I don't know. All the episodes are available at somethingtowrestle.com. The co-host for this radio show on this particular day with JR is Johnny Polo, who's going to go on to be the future Raven. Both of those guys have podcasts today. You should check out the Raven Effect and of course the Jim Ross Report, but he's doing an interview here with Randy Savage, and Randy gets all over Hulk Hogan. And Meltzer says this isn't a work. Quote, the most intriguing aspect of all this is that Hogan was asked a few days earlier to appear on the show, although never informed that Savage would be on or what subject matter was being planned for the show. Apparently there was a well laid out plan to ambush an unknowing Hogan with Savage's comments in a public forum. Hogan, who had done the same radio show 2 weeks prior, apparently had a premonition something was up, since it was awfully quick to be asked back on to do a radio show for a company he was no longer working for, or simply was busy and lucked into not being in a potentially embarrassing position. It should be noted, it was pretty obvious the way Savage, Jim Ross, and Johnny Polo were interacting during the segment that all three knew what was about to be said. Ross, before bringing Savage on as a guest, noted that he would be saying things that you won't believe, and later made comments that some of the things he would be saying you will be reading about tomorrow morning in the sports pages of your newspaper. Although at press time, no newspaper had acknowledged the interview, although I suspect the comments to make the wrestling columns in the few newspapers that have them. It's clear from the television promotion of the show that Ross is working very hard to garner publicity for his radio vehicle. And a few weeks back, Ross was able to get the green light from Vince McMahon to be more controversial on the show and talk about other promotions. So before we talk about what JR and Randy Savage actually talked about, chat me up about why this was a big deal to JR, what opportunity Vince thought it represented, and why McMahon, who normally never acknowledged anybody, that's always been his MO. When you're number one, you don't acknowledge number two. iPhone doesn't talk about Android. Chat me up here. Why did Vince okay this? And what was the value proposition for Vince McMahon's WWF to have this WWF radio show?
There's more exposure, and Vince was looking to try and create something through another medium. And the radio show was produced by a guy by the name of Brad Saul, who had the radio network that we were on. Brad Saul was the one who founded the, podcast.com or something, Web Talk Radio, which is where I had my very first podcast. Really nice guy that ran out of Chicago, and Vince wanted a radio show. He wanted something else. And also Jim Ross had come from Atlanta with his radio show. It was something more for Jim to do. Let him do radio, let him get out. Let's have a talk show and be controversial. And let us be the ones to break the stories and break the news versus the people that didn't work within the business and were just reporting the gossip and rumor.
So let's talk about it. It's well known within wrestling that what Savage said on the show echo things he's been saying in the dressing room, dating back to the period shortly after his divorce in the summer of 1992. Hogan was very protective of McMahon whenever the subject came up in his publicity tour for Mr. Nanny. However, in an item in the New York Daily News gossip section last week, it said that Hogan would be meeting shortly with Ted Turner about starting up a new wrestling company, and it is believed the item wasn't planted by Hogan's side. Hogan did turn down an invitation to appear on WCW to plug his movie. And here's the comments from Savage. Have you heard the name Hulk Hogan, the 5-time World Wrestling Federation champion? Hulk Hogan became at one time the biggest superstar in the history of professional wrestling. I personally used to look up to Hulk Hogan, but that was a big mistake. I really thought he was a friend, but he's definitely not. He's the worst prima donna I've ever met in my life. Hulk Hogan's ego went so far out of control that Hulk Hogan consumed Terry Bollea, which is his real name. Let's just say I've lost a lot of respect for Hulk Hogan, aka Terry Bollea, both as a man and as a human being. That's an extreme understatement that I'm saying right there. A lot of people out there might be thinking it's professional jealousy, but putting professional jealousy aside, if there is any, which I'm not saying there is, I lost respect for Hulk Hogan big time. Number one, when he completely lied on Arsenio Hall, denying the use of anabolic steroids except for the rehabilitation of an injury. And then JR asks the question, Savage, have you used steroids? And he acknowledges, yes, I have. I used anabolic steroids. And when I was on Arsenio Hall, I told the people I did, but they were legal. It's like putting poison in your body. And Savage is asked if he uses them now. No, I sure don't. Nobody does in the WWF, but at the same time I was asked about it, I told the truth. It was prevalent at the time, not just in wrestling, but in all sports, baseball, basketball, football, you name it. It was there. It was in the gyms and it was legal at the time. Before we keep rolling here, you guys have to talk with Vince about discussing steroids in public like this, especially given everything that's going on, right?
The subject was out there. Everybody else was talking about it. That was part of Vince's strategy, was rather than have everyone else talk about it, we'll talk about it and we'll get our story out and be honest about it. Probably one of the biggest things apparently that did hit the company was the Arsenio Hall show. And I think everybody goes back to that of when Hulk said he didn't use steroids on Arsenio Hall. That backlash hurt and stung for a while. There were a lot of people that were upset over that, particularly Randy Savage. I wasn't in the company at the time when that happened, so I don't know firsthand what that general feeling was at the time. However, I remember the after effects and Vince talking about we're still reeling from those comments. He wanted to get his story out there that we were going to do with the WWF radio.
So Savage acknowledges that he knew Hogan was going to lie on the show, and he encouraged him not to, and to just be honest, and, told him the world was more forgiving. Quote, he went on Arsenio Hall and lied. He lied big time. He hurt himself. I'm not worried about him hurting himself though, but he hurt all of the World Wrestling Federation because, like I said before, he was a leader. He was a big time, 5-time World Wrestling Federation champion. So when he talks, people listen. Fair to say? I mean, you're sitting there saying that Vince has said that, man, we're still reeling from those comments.
He was a leader, and it absolutely reflected back on us. And I had been told, Vince, everyone encouraged him, just go out and tell the truth. And because when he did take them, it was legal and it was being prescribed by a doctor for him. So again, all of those different things that people forget about, it was not a good choice in my opinion. And it hurt the company. I think it hurt Hulk for a while. And we were still getting through it, but Vince wanted to get his side out there and wanted to have it a true voice versus going through a third party like a reporter or another talk show like that.
Let me ask you this realistically. We've never talked about this before, but had he not said what he said on Arsenio, what would have been different?
I think that it would have blown over a whole lot faster, because at that point you take the gun out of their hand. When you say, yes, I did it. It was legal. Here's why I did it. I don't do it anymore. But yeah, I sure did. And it probably contributed to my size, and it probably helped me in a lot of ways. Great recoup powers, all that other stuff. But yes, I did it. Now people can't go back and say he took steroid. Well, yeah, he did. He already admitted it. But now when you say, no, I didn't take steroids, you lied.
All right.
So people go back and now they have that to say, no, he's a liar. Fuck him. No, he lied. And everything else, it kills the credibility going forward with everything else. And I believe the audience would have forgiven him and would have rallied around him because he was Hulk Hogan. I think he had that power.